TrekProfiles Podcast, episode 55, recorded May 2021. Hello, old friend. This is the Trek Profiles podcast, but we are interrupting your regular flow of Trek podcasting goodness to bring you this one-time special, which I'm calling Lurker Profiles. In this episode, we are switching fandoms and taking a look at Babylon 5. I am John, your intrepid commander of this whole station, coming to you live and direct from the CNC. And I welcome you to this, the Lurker Profiles podcast, episode 55. If you wish to get in touch with us, you can reach us on the Stellarcom at feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter at TrekProfiles. Warning, this podcast episode contains spoilers for all of Babylon 5, and B5 in particular is very, very sensitive to spoilers. So if you've not seen the show, I do honestly recommend skipping this episode. We'll be back in regular format next time, and Babylon 5 just isn't the same when it's been spoiled for you, so just take my word on that. The M5 has taken a vacation for storage system refurbishment and some floating point calculation speed upgrades, so we welcome our special co-host, the B5 station computer.
Computer ready. All systems at full power.
Computer, show me the announcements.
Messages and announcements displayed on Stellarcom panel.
This is an independent podcast. If you'd like to support us, the best way you can do that is to subscribe via your preferred podcasting platform. Now, there are some lightly edited outtakes and bonus material at the end of this episode. They are a mix from last episode, because in that one, in episode 54, we'd actually started talking about some of the Babylon 5 stuff. So to keep the content straight, I moved it into this episode. So the bonus stuff is a mix of last episode and this episode, but it's all the B5 stuff. So they'll come after the ending audio cards. Enjoy them, or not, as you choose. That's it for messages, communiques, and announcements. Let's move on. Computer, let's run the intelligence profile for this week's guest, and let's start the show.
Gold channel transmission commencing.
His favorite character is Jakar, but he really loves those Minbari too, and his favorite ship is the Black Omega Starfury. It's the co-host of the Mission Log podcast and the YouTube show The Zocalo Livecast, formerly from California, but now from Florida, both located in the Earth Alliance. It's Norman Lao. Welcome, Norman, and thanks for being on the podcast.
I'm so excited to be here, John. I am so excited to be here to do what we're going to do.
Or actually, I should say welcome back to the podcast, because this is really part 2 of our two-parter.
That's true. That's true. And believe it or not, folks, hold on to your headphones, because we're going to be talking about something a little different today.
That's right. This is Babylon 5 Profiles, and computer demands that I ask question 1, which is, Norman, are you a lurker?
I am a lurker. I am a lurker for the longest possible time. Absolutely.
And how did you come to be a lurker?
Oh, let's see. Let's go way back in the time machine, Sherman, and let's talk about the year 1993, when Babylon 5 first premiered on the P10. When the P10 did the premiere, the pilot episode of The Gathering, which was
Primetime Entertainment Network.
That's right, the Primetime Entertainment Network. I was in college. I was in the common room. Nobody was in there, as probably was like on a Friday night or something, or some obscure late night when I had the access to the common room, and there it was. It popped on. It wasn't destination TV for me. I wasn't really following TV guides or the newspapers or anything like that. I was pretty much hip deep in my Star Trek fandom at the time, with Star Trek: The Next Generation being in syndication. Obviously, the original series, which I watched probably more than any other series that I've seen in Star Trek. And that was really easy to find, especially on the weekends in the common room. But this episode, The Gathering, popped up on the TV when I was just clicking through. And I was like, science fiction, that's not Star Trek, on TV. This seems to be interesting to me, and I think I'll watch it. And I have been watching ever since.
I was also around at that time, and one of the common reactions that I used to run across was sort of this, and I think you'll appreciate this reference, this sort of Highlander idea that there can only be one. So there can only be one science fiction TV show, and that's it. And if there's another one out there, it's not appropriate, and it's stealing the thunder that is rightfully ours.
Yeah, that is like literally like the big question between pretty much the two biggest franchises that were out there at the time. Star Trek being on TV, Star Wars being in the theaters at the time only, and then perhaps maybe, in the further third tier, Doctor Who, which we could only really catch on PBS or if you're lucky on some of your local syndicated stations. So when a new science fiction franchise, when it enters the fray, it can't be helped but sized up against Star Trek, because Star Trek owned the medium at least since 1987 to say 1992. That was the look, that was the feel, that was the expectation, that was the watermark of what people, casual or veteran fans of science fiction, that's what they held any standard to. So when Babylon 5 came on the scene, it was new, it was different, it was, for lack of a better term, and pardon the pun, it was alien and foreign to people. Because the Herman Zimmerman look of Star Trek did not exist. This was the Johnny Iaccovelli and optic nerve look of special effects and production. This was a completely different aesthetic. It did not have the same bright colors of Star Trek. It didn't have the uniforms that people are associated with Star Trek. It didn't have the star power that people associated with Star Trek, especially where Patrick Stewart was concerned. Michael O'Hare, who played Commander Sinclair, was a B-movie-ish, C-movie-ish actor of the time. You could find him on like HBO dramas and things of that nature.
Right.
But all of a sudden you have, and because it was highly compared to, at the time, Deep Space Nine, which was already firmly established, you had these two separate entities that the fandom could not help but try and compare and contrast. And obviously, since the fandom in total was more supportive of Star Trek than anything else, Babylon 5 became the also-ran. And how dare you put something so similar against something so established?
The idea that it's similar is hilarious, besides the fact that they're in the future and in space. That's about it, And it's sort of a thing I always like to remind people is that the premises of these shows don't matter all that much, right? And I can't remember if we talked about this before. I think I've mentioned it on the show previously, perhaps not with you, but it's always, when I think about King Kong and Romeo and Juliet, they have the same premise, right? It's really the execution of the story that makes it different.
Right.
And so it's hard, I think, for people who are in this modern era of streaming when there's so many entertainment choices. I mean, you can come out with a new sci-fi show tomorrow and no one bats an eye. But back at the time, there was sort of the scarcity mindset.
Yes.
For those of us who lived through it, that was just very strange and almost inaccessible to someone who's just sort of becoming aware of fandoms and star franchises and all that stuff today. There just wasn't this mentality. It was very, very different. And so today you can have an Altered Carbon, you can have Dark Matters, you can have, just whatever kind of sci-fi show you want to have, you can have it. And it's like the more the merrier, right?
Right.
But it certainly wasn't that attitude back then. So a couple interesting things about The Gathering, I thought. It had a very different tone. You talked about how it looked different, right? It had that sort of darker, and I mean on the camera darker, not tonally, although
aesthetically
darker.
Was
that too.
Yeah, for sure.
But aesthetically darker. And it had sort of this weird music, the Stuart Copeland score. It was really different than what people were used to.
Right.
I mean, they were really just doing something pretty different for the time. So did you keep up with it as it came on in original syndication?
Well, I mean, I tried to. The issue with what happened with, say, The Gathering to when the first premiere episode came out was about a year. So you had The Gathering in 1993, and then like much later you had Midnight on the Firing Line, which was the actual first episode of Babylon 5. So in that time, that's where, first of all, the syndication was always a crapshoot. It was just across the board. So trying to find a syndicated channel that would even host Babylon 5, let alone be able to try and find it in perpetuity or consistency was,
where it wasn't preempted by sports.
Exactly. It was problematic at best, or even having the episodic order changed around. But that's where I think Star Trek always had kind of like the advantage over Babylon 5 at the time, because it was a very established syndicated show. And if there's one thing that fandom really depends upon, it's consistency. So if you have the consistency of going week to week to week and building that episodic progress, then you know that you have something that you can depend on for destination TV, which was actually very important at the time. Destination TV, I don't really think exists anymore, since you can pretty much, call to order anything that you want to watch, whether it was 2 years ago, 10 years ago, or yesterday.
Yeah.
That is the what do they call the embarrassment of riches of the amount of content that we can watch now. But if you missed an episode somewhere along the line back in the early 1990s, I should say, it was really hard to kind of like recapture and find. Unless you had friends that are really good with their VHS machines and were willing to dole out their tapes and lend those to you, to catch up. So I think that what hurt Babylon 5 originally at the beginning was the span of time that it took for them to use the data and the reports that they got from the gathering, see if that actually had any ROI, with ad investors and things of that nature. Mm-hmm. And then there was a lot of the politics that was going on with the breakup of the P10 and the Warner Brothers distribution network. So there was a lot of politics that was happening, and you can read a lot of those details more, in depth in J. Michael Straczynski's autobiography, Becoming Superman. He goes into
talks a lot about that,
great length and detail about that. But then all of a sudden, Midnight on the Firing Line comes, and if you watch The Gathering, you'd be like, yeah, I remember it. I don't think I taped it, but it looks similar, and it's new again, or new-ish, and it just, that's I think probably one of the biggest setbacks that ever happened to Babylon 5 was just it allowed Deep Space Nine to really establish itself in the the milieu of limited science fiction. And then then Deep Space Nine was really able to get a foothold. And rightfully so. Deep Space Nine, I love Deep Space Nine. It's just that by comparison and contrast, when you had something that actually came out before Deep Space Nine, and then Deep Space Nine comes in, establishes itself with a very good, strong first season, and then you have another TV show that comes in with essentially the same premise on paper, space, science fiction, space station, a commander instead of a captain, because Sisto started off as a commander, strong first officer female, etc., etc., etc. Then you can see why fans of Deep Space Nine would be, okay, these people are a Hail Mary attempt at trying to establish something new in science fiction, which I think was far from the case.
Right on. So were you able to navigate the vicissitudes of syndicated TV and actually watch the show as it was coming out as best you can? Seasons 1 through 5?
Quote unquote, as best I could. Yes. It was actually a little bit more stable around probably midway through season 2. It found a good syndicated rhythm where I was in New Jersey. I was in art school at the time. But seasons 3 through 5 were a little bit more stable. Well, actually, I should say seasons 3 through 4, because at the end of season 4, there was a tumult behind the scenes between being dropped by the syndication system, wherever it was, and then TNT coming in and kind of like doing the natural Roll-20 saving throw at the last minute to be able to have Babylon 5 back on the air. So obviously that caused some narrative flow consistency problems that a lot of people still talk about, especially when it comes to season 5, but we'll get to that in a little bit later.
Do you remember, since you watched the show on TNT in season 5, do you remember Rough Cut?
I don't think so. I don't remember that.
On TNT, they used to have this little, I want to say 2-minute commercial for an upcoming movie on TNT with these two hosts, and it was called TNT Rough Cut.
That sounds familiar, yeah.
I could not stand Rough Cut. It grated on me to no end. And every time I used to have to mute the TV with my finger on the button, because I knew as soon as it was over, the show was coming back on. And I don't know if I was alone in my my intense dislike for Rough Cut. So I guess not so much in your case, since you don't remember it, but I had to ask.
Maybe I just blanked that out, but it was well reported that TNT was trying to rebrand their programming, and TNT for a long time was the wrestling channel. So they had a lot of WWF when it was called WWF, World Wrestling Federation. And I think that the reason why they brought Babylon 5 onto TNT is because they felt that the WWF audience and the Babylon 5 audience shared similar interests. I'm not exactly sure on data or on paper where that comes from, but of course, people that are involved in entertainment, sports, wrestling would have the exact same interests in science fiction programming. I guess that's what the logic was at the time.
Exactly. So I feel fairly confident in asking you that you've probably seen all the Babylon 5 that there is to see.
From The Gathering all the way to The Lost Tales. Yes.
All right. Well, we shan't talk about those. So,
but yes.
So my question for you, Norman, is this. When you're feeling a hankering for watching some B5, especially given the incredibly serialized nature of the show. I mean, people talk about Deep Space Nine being serialized. It's really not so much.
Right.
I mean, it's weakly serialized, in my opinion. That's not a criticism. It's just that it's just not. How do you choose to tackle it? I mean, can you just pop in an episode, or do you sort of have to watch a season at a time or something? I mean, how do you scratch that itch when it comes to you?
Well, I do a full season rewatch every year. That's just part of my rotation, which is probably why I'm behind on so many things, because I can either watch something new and be relatively comforted in the fact that I'll see something that I haven't seen before, and that will be new to me. But in all honesty, I really enjoy the comfort level of going back to the shows that I love, especially Babylon 5. And when I go back to Babylon 5 for my rewatch, there's passive watching and there's active watching when it comes to rewatching. Right? There are episodes that you know so well, like, well, one of my favorite episodes is David Gerald's Believers in season 1. And I know that people, there have been many comments about that, pro and con, online, but that's what the internet is. So I'll watch some of those episodes and then try and pay more attention to them, because as an audience, we're not stagnant, we're not static either. We grow. We evolve, our experiences change us over time to where we were when we saw it for the first time or the umpteenth time to where we are now. So if I watch a Believers now, I get far more out of it as an older person than I saw 20 years ago or 25 years ago. But I usually go and pay attention more towards like the highlights. If you want to quote unquote say the shadow storyline, going all the way back to like when Londo gets the eye, this is not a thing, this is the eye. And that starts in the introduction of Morden, and it kind of just really cascades from there. I mean, I do love a lot of the slow character building and the small nuggets of world building that JMS like introduces in the first season. But this is where JMS was really kind of sharing the writing credits and the writing responsibilities with Larry DiTillio. Yeah, his partner from all the way back to He-Man and the Masters of the Universe when they were writing that cartoon series together. So there is a little bit of variety in, I would say, like the first maybe season and a half, because there was a little bit more of a writing room. And then when Larry DiTillio departed the project, it was really all on J. Michael Straczynski, and then everything could pretty much flow from his brain to the paper to the screen. So basically, to long story short, your question, I watch each season, but I only really pay most particular attention to what I believe are the highlight episodes. Like in season 1, for me, it would be, I love Quality of Mercy because it introduces the alien healing device and the aspect of the mind wipe. Obviously, Chrysalis, because it changes everything. I mean, Sinclair perfectly capstones that episode with Nothing's the Same Anymore. And that changes what he said. It's true, because the entire landscape of Babylon 5 changes after the departure of Michael O'Hare.
And that it's interesting you bring up Chrysalis, because that highlights one of the most amazing things I think about the show is that you can go back like 7, 8, 10 episodes maybe before that, and every time you see Delenn in her quarters, she's playing with her little Minbari, Lego set, and you're like, what? They never talk about it. They don't, but she's just like doing her little hobby there, and you're like, oh, is this some kind of Minbari like meditation activity, And if they don't say anything, they don't refer to it, and all of a sudden, boom, there's the thing at the end of the season, right?
Exactly.
And, they just lay all these little things in there, and one of the things I was actually talking to a friend of mine about who's watching the show for the first time is how they were able to produce the show on really a shoestring budget, and also in an environment that was mostly positive. Mm-hmm. And I was really impressed by reading some of JMS's writings where he talks about sort of the alien crew that they had on staff. Right. So they could, they had all these actors that just showed up every day, and they were all the same size, and they could be like, all right, you're going to be a Minbari, you're going to be a Narn, or I need 3 Drazi today. And, there was no casting, there was no nothing. They were already there. Right. And so it like the new director of the week didn't have to cast all the background guys, it just made everything easier. And the fact that Joe had such control over the scripts, right? That there was never a late, well, not never, but there was hardly ever a late script with revisions.
Right.
So like the art department, construction, they were all able to make everything happen, right on schedule, right? And all the actors just had a normal 12-hour workday, which for TV is pretty normal, right? Whereas you look back on a lot of other shows, Star Trek included, they work in 18-hour days.
Yeah.
Like every day, to get the shows out on time. But the most interesting part to me was that they chose to not film it on the studio lot.
Right. Yeah.
I think that was probably, just as someone who does organizational psychology for a living, it really changed the tone of sort of the whole organization, right? Because they just took it like way out to that old hot tub factory in Sun Valley. And it really just took away a lot of the studio stuff, The suits didn't come by. They didn't have to worry about, the executives popping in to see what was going on, and all like the Hollywood hierarchy stuff didn't really play as much when they were sort of off by themselves like that. It really was an interesting way of setting up the series, I thought.
And I think that much to JMS's credit, it's one of the things that networks really look at from a cost and return on investment standpoint is that the investment in a large scale production, even if Babylon 5 wasn't as large scale as say Star Trek was at the time, you're looking at, can they turn in a consistent quality product under budget, on time, so that they can actually set their advertising against it, they can set their schedule against it, they can set all of their budgetary items against it. That causes less problems for the powers that be upstairs, which makes you less of a target for any kind of investigation or drama or any type of like network interference. If you're just kind of, Babylon 5 was like the little space station that could. It just consistently plodded along week after week after week, not making waves, not making headaches, not making drama. It was what it was. It was able to execute what it needed to execute from a storytelling standpoint, but it never really ruffled the feathers of the Hollywood machine. And I think that that's where J. Michael Straczynski was like, you know what, if I'm going to do this, I can't afford to take the types of political business risks that networks usually tend to fixate their sights on and try and find ways to shut you down.
Right on. So let's bring it back to sort of your Babylon 5 fandom, Norman. Are you a collector of anything Babylon 5 related?
I wish I was a better collector of Babylon 5 merchandise. And to be honest, it's difficult to find Babylon 5 merchandise other than the standard support mechanisms that are out there or were out there at the time. The action figures, I've collected some. Some of the pins and patches. I have an extensive patch collection. I have tried to hunt down every single possible patch ever seen on Babylon 5.
Like all the Star Fury squadrons and all that stuff?
Exactly. But even to, as you said, like one of my favorite ships, my favorite ship in Babylon 5 is the Black Omega Star Fury. And I've even hunted down Bester's flight suit patches.
Nice.
There's a vendor online where I think that they had the initial patterns, or they have the excess surplus of the patches that they made, because you just can't one-off things. You have to buy minimums, and they sold some of that excess surplus. But I do have my crowning achievement of my collection in Babylon 5 is my 3D hero bust of Jakar.
Nice.
Yes, that was limited to about 3,000 pieces. And it's an interesting bust of Jakar because it's Jakar's prosthetic from The Gathering, where he looked a little bit more reptilian. He had a little bit more of a pronounced jaw. He has both of his eyes, so both of his eyes are red. But it's not as the softer Jakar that looked a little bit more kind of like the amalgamation of the prosthetic and Andreas's features that was a little bit more prominent later on. But it's prominent, it's on my desk, and it just reminds me every day of why I love this show. I don't really need a lot of collectibles when it comes to this. I have my Babylon 5 encyclopedia from B5 Books. I have a couple of their signature books, like the B520 hardcover coffee table book. And I have a paperback version of the encyclopedia because I would never dare crack open my leather-bound one because of sake of oily fingerprints and whatnot. The level of attention to detail, though, because I was I was what they call one of the rangers. I was looking for inconsistencies and spelling errors and things like that. So I was in charge of a certain section of the encyclopedia.
Yeah. I did that too.
Did you? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
But don't you love the fact that it's in two volumes? One has a purple bookmark, satin bookmark. The other one has a green satin bookmark.
Yes, of course. Purple and green, of course.
That's a deep cut Babylon 5 detail where if you were just someone...
Is it though, Norman? Is it though? Is it deep cut?
I think it is.
Is it really?
Purple and green?
I think it's one of the most popular things in all lurkerdom is purple and green.
For us, yes. For the outside public who just got into it, and then they got it, and they're like, why are these two different colored bookmarks? I don't think they really
even notice. Yeah.
So it doesn't get to that point where where Ivanova would like tear off a scarf and put it on another Drazi, and then or she would have both scarves in her hand, and now she's leader. So yeah, that's a fun detail that Babylon 5 fans will really appreciate.
I have all the B5 books.
Do you?
All of them.
Oh, the script books. I think you mentioned this before.
All of them.
Every printed page.
Every single one. And it's a stack that is probably 7 feet high. I've never actually tried to measure it, but it really is amazing how much stuff he's put out, including like the original treatments that go all the way back to the 80s, that he was writing up. I have all of those. I have the CNN interview DVDs. I have the convention DVDs. Everything they sold through B5 Books, pretty much I bought, except for like some of like the laser cut sort of paperweights. I didn't buy those.
Those I have.
Yeah. Oh, you like those?
Yeah.
That was just not my thing.
Yeah.
But I wanted all the reference material. And it one of the things I really love about the encyclopedia is that there's this idea that this is actually the book of what is authentic and true. And like if you get in an argument with another Babylon 5 fan, you can open up the book and look up the entry in the official canon book and be like, no, this is the answer,
Or you can, and then they did a great job at making that accessible as an online format as well.
Yeah. The
one thing though, and I'm going to plug Captain Jacqueline from B5 Books because she and I have been, Captain Jacqueline.
Yes, of course.
I emailed her a suggestion where I think, I think we missed an opportunity here where you could have created a data crystal USB drive. And the data crystals, so if you're not familiar with Babylon 5, say in Star Trek, you had computer disks, you had isolinear rods, you had those types of hard storage devices that you could take with you or transport with you, or the pads. In Babylon 5, their key method of storing, either large amounts of data or small amounts of data for transfer files is a crystal. It was organic technology that used crystalline structure for data storage. And I think that would have been the most perfect collector's item for a Babylon 5 fan, having the entirety of the canonized version of this Babylon 5 universe in a USB data crystal.
Oh, I think, man, that just would have been glorious. I'd have totally bought that.
Exactly.
I'd totally bought that. That's amazing. But it gives me such pleasure just to look at those books and also to be able to open up the scripts and actually read something. If someone asks me a question, I can actually go look at it, right? And be like, yeah, I have all the scripts, like all of them, including like the earlier revisions and, all the stuff. So it's just my favorite thing. So where did you actually get that bust, though? Do you know who made those or where they came from?
It was something along the lines of like 3D heroes, three-dimensional heroes. It's the only one of the Babylon 5 characters that they made. I didn't know if they had plans for making any more. If there was a Londo bust, I would have bought that, but the box should have been huge because you have to like make sure that his hair piece is properly protected so that it didn't snap off at the ends. But it was very limited edition, and I didn't have that when it originally came out. Much like most art students, I really didn't have a lot of money. But when it came out and it was available on eBay, I had the fortune of being able to be a little bit more comfortable financially, so I just bought that without reservation.
Nice.
It was a buy it now. I dare not say how much I paid for it, but you know what? My bank account is recovered, and Jakar is still here. So
that's right. It is. Yeah. It is mine. It is mine. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's wonderful. Did you ever go to any Babylon 5 conventions?
Not specifically, no. Not like say like the Phoenix Comic Con where they did the 20th anniversary. At Comic Con, I have met stars. I met Robin Atkins Downs. I met Tracy Scoggins. I've met Claudia Christian. I met Bruce Boxleitner. And when I went to his booth, I was speechless. I didn't really, I try not to be when it comes to meeting celebrities, but I think there's a point in time where you find that one show that means more to you than anything in the world. And the characters in that show, you know that they're characters, but you also know how much what they were able to bring to this project means to you personally. So when I meet somebody like a Bruce Boxleitner, first of all, he's Tron. So I'm like, oh my God, I'm meeting Tron, right? Or Scarecrow, or John Sheridan. And it was just like, my mind was racing faster than my speech could bear. So it ended up just being just this, I don't even know what I said. And it was, but then again, he was probably just like, yeah, I get that a lot. You know,
I'm sure he does. I'm sure he does. Yeah. And you know, it's interesting because I've always felt even more of that feeling when I'm dealing with the sort of behind the scenes creatives, you know, like the writers or the directors or the producers, because we love the actors in the shows, you know, and they're the ones we see on screen. But in a lot of cases, they only have access to the scripts that they're given and sort of, you know, what was going on right around them. You know, when you ask, what does it all mean, right? And, you know, what was the whole overriding like, they don't even know, you know, and that's not a criticism. It's just that's not their gig, right?
Well, it's a job. It's their job.
Yeah. It's their job. But you have, you know, sort of like, I would probably feel that way if I ever met Joe. Right. Mm-hmm. And he would undoubtedly be horrified by it because he's literally one of the most down to earth people. Right. And he's just not like that. And you know that if you follow him anywhere and you read sort of his history. But I would certainly feel that way. I remember going to a Babylon 5 convention in Burbank, California called Agamemnon, which is now that's nice. A deep cut reference.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's a deep cut reference, but it was a great time, and I got to meet a bunch of people at that, got autographs and all those kinds of things. So that was kind of a blast for me. But not too many conventions left. Babylon 5 conventions, I think, happening anymore. I think it was mostly a thing of the moment in the 90s. But every now and then we get to see the actors and stuff on their shows, which is always nice. Yeah, in different things.
And there's a funny anecdote that I think that if you've ever been to a JMS panel at Comic-Con or any other, you know, appearance where he's at, someone will say, "Hi, Joe. I love Babylon 5. I'm a huge fan." His first reaction, I saw this 3 times in a row, he says, "Well, you're actually a medium-sized fan." Or because of their height, their stature. Yeah. And all of a sudden, that is just the best icebreaker. Everyone just kind of laughs and a lot of shoulders just get untensed. And then he goes about his business. It's just that's what you expect from Joe. You know, he has that kind of reserved personality, but every once in a while he will throw out that Joe thing that he does. It's just very disarming, and it's not in a mean-spirited way. It's just his sense of humor, and it's pervasive throughout all of Babylon 5.
Yeah, you get the feeling when you read his autobiography. Well, you don't. That puts it too lightly. When you read his autobiography, it becomes obvious that, you know, he's someone who actually came from the fandom, right?
Yeah.
He grew up with this stuff, right? Reading Harlan, reading Asimov, you know, reading comic books,
wearing Superman T-shirts underneath that Superman patch that was pinned to the inside of his jacket.
Yeah,
you know, from the Superman fan club.
Yep, and so he came from that world, and so he understands, right, in a way that like someone who might be a pure Hollywood creature may not really grok it like he does.
Right.
So I think that's really awesome. So all right, I think we should talk about some episodes. Norman, are you game?
I am 100% game.
All right, so as host, I have to be a little meta here, and I think that the biggest challenge for me is going to be to kind of keep all this under control without like going completely off the rails, because I could literally talk about I could actually talk about any one of these episodes for at least 5 times its actual running time.
I feel you.
So let's start with a big bang. Let's talk about Severed Dreams from season 3. Now, I always recommend Severed Dreams be viewed as a little mini binge, along with Messages from Earth, Point of No Return, and Severed Dreams. You have to watch all 3 together. Like, don't even bother.
Right.
Just don't even bother watching one. Just watch them all 3 together, or don't. Right? Because you got kind of this Earth little story that's sort of tied in together. 3 very tonally different episodes, but Severed Dreams, certainly mind-blowing in a lot of ways. But I want to know from you, Norman, what makes it special to you?
Well, I think that I'm going to steal a little bit of another anecdote from Joe. And Joe said in one of his interviews, or somewhere that he said it online, or in one of his, one of his many papers that he's published, he said that in life there are several it moments: your life before it and your life after it. And I think that Severed Dreams falls right squarely, like in the middle of the tonal shift of Babylon 5, because that's where everything changes. That's that John, Sheridan, he makes his declaration to break free from Earth. You're seeing basically the consequences of Earth Alliance ships trying to rally to Babylon 5 for safe harbor. You actually see open warfare against ships from the Earth Alliance. You're seeing like the casualties of the beginning of a civil war in the midst of another war, in the midst of the upcoming Shadow War. And then you got to see not only John Sheridan challenge the powers that brought him to this point of his career, but you saw that happen with Delenn as well when she confronts the Grey Council and she breaks the staff of the leader of the Grey Council, Ducat's staff at one point in time.
That's right. Because
she said, if you aren't willing to make the sacrifice of joining the war, then this council has to be broken and it has to be challenged to see like exactly what are we doing here? Exactly why have we protected and persevered and followed the prophecy of Valen if we're not going to act at this point? She knew that this was the tipping point of when humanity, or at least John Sheridan's crusade, needed the Minbari the most. And when she delivered that line at the very end, when she came through the jump gate after the Earth Alliance ships just completely devastated Babylon 5, and where Corwin says we can't take any more of that, and then he said jump gates are forming on top of us, and there were 4 of them, and then the Charlene class cruisers appeared with Delenn and that very just incredible zoom in, and she said that the only captain that's ever defeated a Minbari ship is behind me. You are in front of me. If you value your lives, be somewhere else. That was the power of the Minbari just flexing a little bit to the Earth Alliance, saying that you remember what happened. Remember the Battle of the Line? That's all that she needed to do. But then again, that just changes the power curve of what was happening in that particular war. So now you have the Grey Council broken. You have John Sheridan's reputation at stake now with Earth Alliance. He's broken away from it. Babylon 5 has become this neutral territory. And then what? What happens after this?
It's literally a moment where the rug gets pulled out from under you, right?
Yes.
And I tell people who are just starting to watch the show is that you think you know what this show is, and then they pull the rug out from under you, and then you're like, well, now what? Mm-hmm. Right? Oh, the show's going to be all about this thing, right? No, it's not. We're going to solve that. And now there's going to be something else. Why did the Minbari surrender at the Battle of the Line? That's the show. That's the show, right? That's what it's all about. Oh, no. Okay, great. Now, oh, wait, it's going to be this big war. It's going to be this. Oh, wait, no. We're going to move on to something else, and it's like it just keeps doing that. Although I have to admit, my favorite anecdote from that show isn't actually something that's on screen. It's the accidental casting of Bruce McGill is my favorite anecdote from the show. And I just wish that cell phone cameras had existed and had been affixed on Joe when he walks on the set and he's like, who the hell's that guy? That's the guy you told us to hire. That's not the guy. I wanted the other guy.
Oh, yeah, because General Haig. I remember seeing him in a 2-parter of Deep Space Nine. I'm like, did he not? No,
Norman, no, there's a different story.
No. I mean, like, I know that the actor General Haig was supposedly supposed to be the contact for John Sheridan all the way through it. But then all of a sudden Major Ryan came. He says that General Haig was killed or something like that, right?
Right. But that's not what I'm referring to.
Oh, okay.
Bruce McGill as Major Ryan was not supposed to be in that episode.
Oh, okay.
So what had happened was, I guess you hadn't heard this story.
No.
So what had happened was when they were getting ready to cast in Severed Dreams, Joe said, I want that actor McGill. No audition, just call his agent and arrange it. He was thinking of Everett McGill. That's the guy he wanted. The guy who was Stilgar in the David Lynch Dune film.
Sure.
That's Everett McGill. Yeah. That's the guy he wanted. So the casting director goes and looks up McGill and finds Bruce McGill.
D-Day from
and
Animal
calls
House.
him up and says, hey, we've got a part for you. No audition. Just come on down. And they had, I remembered a corollary to the story was that the costume people had gone to Joe and said, so you're getting this guy McGill? And they're like, yeah, he's really thin. I think we have a ton of stuff that'll fit him. It won't be a problem. And then Bruce McGill shows up and he's a little bit more portly.
Yeah, he's spaced out.
And they had to totally redo the costume for him, which is why it actually doesn't sit very well on him if you look at the show.
Yeah.
Right. Which I think kind of fits with the theme. So, nothing sort of fits right at that moment in time. But Joe literally walked on the set and was expecting to see a different actor.
I like that happened because Everett McGill has a certain look to him. He's very military looking. He was in Heartbreak Ridge. He has that look. He has kind of like the squinty eyes, kind of like the Clint Eastwood kind of flavor to him. But I like that Major Ryan just looked natural and normal. I think, and even in, I watched Severed Dreams on HBO Max, and one of the things that I really like is that after they did the remastering process, you can actually see a little bit of 5 o'clock shadow, on Major Ryan, and they look a little bit more harrowed. They look a little bit like, yeah, we've been through a lot. We really need to reach a safe haven. But I like that the body styling in Babylon 5 isn't as typical or as consistent in that way as, say, Star Trek. Babylon, like Earth, Major Ryan was a captain of a, was the Hyperion class destroyer? Omega class destroyer.
Omega class, the Alexander.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden, he's just this kind of very normal looking guy. Right? Yeah. He's not like super heroic looking. He's not statuesque looking. And he looks like, he's been through the ringer. So, sure, Everett McGill would have been interesting and different. But I do like they got Bruce McGill. Also big fan of Animal House.
I completely agree. I love Bruce McGill in the role. And this is literally art by accident. He told the casting director to get McGill. McGill shows up, wrong McGill.
That's so funny.
I can't believe you hadn't heard that one. No. That is my favorite anecdote regarding that show.
Oh, that is hilarious.
I just wish I could have seen Joe's face on the set when he shows up and he's like, who the hell is that?
Or the cast, or costuming comes in. It's like, this doesn't fit him by a country mile. Right? Not even close. We got to you got to take out a little bit in there just because he's a little bit fuller looking. Joe'd be like, fuller looking how? This guy's like 6'5" and he's like as skinny as a rail. Right? And I was like, no. But I like how he contrasts, I can't remember, Philip Morris.
Yes.
Right? So I like how the contrast is there between, Ryan, who looks, again, completely beaten down. Maybe he's hit the snack bar a couple times too many, but maybe it's just stress eating. And then you have Phil Morris in there who's just so statuesque and so, chiseled jaw.
Ramrod straight.
Oh, my God. It was such a great, captain, first officer aesthetic. I loved that.
Oh, it was fantastic. And, one of the things that really grates on me is when we get into this, like, the effects are not good on Babylon 5 discussion. Mm-hmm. Because I always break it apart into sort of two approaches, which is that the thing that I like about the special effects on Babylon 5 is that because they were CG, they were able to do things which were much more realistic, like having a ship go from the bottom of the screen to the top of the screen while flying backwards, and firing at the same time, which is a completely normal thing to do in space, right? But a lot of shows, and I'm not just talking about Star Trek, I'm talking about a lot of historical science fiction, because they were using models, they were sort of stuck in a design language of what they could show us on screen based on what they could produce on a TV schedule, right? So like everything's sort of in the same plane, and even when they got into CG and stuff that came later, if they wanted to be consistent with their earlier design language, everything kind of matched, even though they didn't have to do it that way. Right. So you still have ships flying like airplanes and things like that, which makes no sense whatsoever. And you really see that in an episode like Severed Dreams, where they are just like stuff's flying every which way. Ships are turning and tumbling and going backwards and forwards. And it's just wild, man. It's wild. And I loved every single thing about it.
Well, I think that I like how you said that there was like a design philosophy that, it was limited to the technology, a lot of the tracking technology that they had to do for all these different camera passes. Because we've seen behind the scenes of Star Trek where they had to do, the hero shot, the lighting shot, the effects shot, and kind of like, track all those on a digital mat to make sure that those really grand sweeping gestures are all caught and timed the same way. That is very limiting because that's all based on route. That's all based on a pre-programmed, XYZ axis. And I think that was jarring about Babylon 5 is that when people started watching it and started really trying to decipher and understand the design and visual aesthetic, that they were trying to compare it with, well, this isn't as grand, or this isn't as epic, or this isn't as polished as, say, a Star Trek. But one thing I remember when watching, like, I think it was when the Future Enterprise, when Riker was in charge of the Enterprise with the third nacelle, he came in from like a very different angle, like almost shooting downwards from the screen. And I said, wow, that's significant, because it's the first time you ever saw a Galaxy class style starship coming from a different angle other than the standard normal, orbital pass, which is fine, right. But you want to push the audience's expectations. And I think that if you compare, yes, the CGI, say like the Star Furies against the Raiders, in season 1, a little bit on the primitive side. But if you want to go like all the way to, say, Endgame in season 4, where it was the climax of the Civil War, and then the Agamemnon, shooting through all the defense systems. It's night and day, really. I mean, they were the Optic Nerve and John Volich. I mean, those guys just went for broke. They went for broke on those.
Wasn't that Foundation doing that stuff?
I think. Oh yeah. I think Optic Nerve was earlier, and then Foundation was later, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And Optic Nerve was a lot of the makeup too.
I think so. Yeah.
I could be wrong on that. I don't know. We can look that up later, or have someone on the internet correct us. But let's move on. Let's talk about a very different kind of episode, Norman. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about a much more lowercase h human episode. Let's talk about Believers from season 1. Mm-hmm. The glorious Trisha O'Neill and Stephen Lee as the parents of the child Sean, belonging to the race that I believe we only know them as the Children of Time. I don't think we actually get a better name than that. And they're stuck on the station, and there's sort of a medical calamity that occurs with Sean. Certainly a very sort of Star Trek-y type of episode, I think. Probably the most Star Trek-y that Babylon 5 ever really gets, especially early on. So a very interesting episode written by David Gerrold. I'm curious, though, as to what in this episode touches you.
Well, what I love about this is that you are getting a Star Trek aesthetic, from the storytelling. The story revolves around a young boy who has to undergo an emergency life-saving operation. And then there are the powers that be. Dr. Franklin believes that he has the right to be able to operate on him. The parents believe that if you operate on him, that it violates our faith. And then they have the ambassadors who the parents seek out for guidance and assistance, all having their own, I guess, their own slant on what will this do for us. And this really, what I love about this episode is that you have these two storylines going on, because you're establishing the personalities, or at least the principles of the 4 separate governments. The Minbari don't want to interfere because they're the elves of Babylon 5, right? They don't interfere unless interfered with. Mm-hmm. The Narn are looking for any type of possible advantage, scientific, medical, or otherwise. Londo, he's out there because no one else wants the job, so it's like, just how much charity can you afford?
Right, yeah, you got some money?
Yeah, you got some money because I got to gamble and drink. And the Vorlons don't care. The Vorlons don't care about anything of anybody. But then you have the one character that sits down with him and actually asks him what he does want. And that was Sinclair. Sinclair asked Sean, what do you want to have happen to you? Where do you see yourself in all this? And it's a very touching moment, because of all of these galactic powers, of all the power that he holds in his authority as governor of Babylon 5, he talks to Sean, not around Sean. Everyone else is talking around Sean. And I also love that Dr. Franklin really kind of flexes his character here, more so than Infection, when we were first really introduced to the background of his character. But here is where Dr. Franklin really establishes himself as the man, the doctor type personality, where it was in that, was it a movie with Alec Baldwin where he's talking about playing God, where doctors play God. And he's like, when you think that the parents are kneeling down in the chapel in the hospital and they're praying that someone saves their son from a horrific car accident, who do you think they're praying to? They're praying to me, right? They're praying for me to do God's work. So I am God in this situation. I'm the instrument through which the divine flows. And that's where Franklin takes umbrage with their request to help hit their son. Because if you want the divine to flow through me to save your son, then let me save him, right? Let me do what I'm supposed to do as his physician. I am supposed to save lives. That is my Hippocratic oath. That is my nature as a doctor. I'm supposed to serve and protect the life of an innocent patient. But you won't let me, right? This is the best that we can do, and you won't let me, so I'm going to do it myself. Why? Because my faith as a healer has to be as good as or outweigh, since I have the power on the station, the faith of these people that are asking me to help their son, right? If you don't want me to help him, don't walk into my infirmary. But if you want me to, then let me do my job. And the hubris of the ramifications of his hubris at the end, I think, was a really huge turning point for Franklin.
Yeah.
And that was something unexpected. And again, that's where Joe comes into play, subverting the expectations of where you think the story is going to go. In the next generation, all would be well.
Yeah, you wouldn't be killing the kid.
No.
Not like this.
No. So
not like this.
Not like this. And if you haven't seen it in a while, people that are listening out there, really pay attention to what's going on in this episode. I think it's some of the finest storytelling in Babylon 5. It has nothing to do with intergalactic wars or politics of a certain sense or governments like clashing or, political machinations, say, with like the Centauri and the Narn. It's just a very quiet story of who is in the right. Who has the right to do what?
When I watch the episode, I see it as sort of the car crash that was averted in a way. Because in my opinion, if a butterfly had flapped its wings a little bit differently in the episode, it would have just come across as preachy and obnoxious. And it doesn't, right? It comes across as very genuine and wonderful. And I think that it really rests upon the tremendous dignity that the parents have in the episode, right? They don't come across as lunatics, I think,
right.
Or like screechy nutcases. They are clearly intelligent. They clearly have this really dignity. It's only the word that I can really put to it. And if the actors had not been up to the role, if the casting had not been quite as good, I think this whole episode would have gone sideways.
Yeah.
But it just was a real great alchemy of the casting, the direction that they got, the writing that really just made it spectacular. And I just loved everything about it. I really did. And I also like the intentional misdirection from Tharg, the father, when he tells Franklin, he tells Sinclair, if he touches the boy, I will kill him. And everybody who watches that thinks he's talking about the doctor, but he's not.
The robe.
Oh, yes.
And the glopid egg.
Yeah, the glopid egg. All those things that we remember from the episode. Really spectacular. Yeah. All right. Let's take a look at something a little bit maybe lighter. I don't know. We'll have to see. Let's take a look at A View from the Gallery, season 5 episode with Mac and Bo.
Oh, I love this episode so much.
So why do you love it so much?
Well, first of all, I'm a huge fan of season 5. I love season 5, and I have actually defended it on other podcasts where people have come to me and said, please let us know why. What are you seeing that we aren't seeing? And that's a completely different thing. But why I love this episode is because I love seeing stories from non-main characters' points of view. And these aren't even guest starring characters. When you say guest starring characters, you're talking about your Catherine Sakai's, your Naroons, your linear, not linear, but characters of that nature. Mac and Bo were just this one-off. They were just this one-off story about 2 maintenance workers on Babylon 5, which are established as a thing all the way back to season 1 when you're looking at the laborists episode.
By any means necessary.
By any means necessary. So you know that there's a labor force that works and maintains Babylon 5 because somebody has to. And they're just 2 regular guys that are caught up in very extraordinary circumstances. They're kind of like the hobbits, right? They're the hobbits of like the Lord of the Rings story. Because they're walking through these epic instances and events that are happening right on the station. There's an alien invasion that's happening that they have to clean up the mess for. There's an incursion that happens that they have to clean up the mess for. They even run into the telepaths in a certain way that they have to clean up the mess for. Or at least they get involved with understanding, like, especially Mac in this case. No, Bo in this case. Mac in this case. Wanted to be a pilot, and Byron telekinetically puts him out there, and he understands the pros and cons of be careful what you wish for. But also, you get these really quiet moments where Mac and Bo were both asked to escort Delenn to safety, and she does what Delenn does and just kind of psychically whammies them with her Delenness.
Yeah, she's very good at that.
And it's just very charming because rarely do you get a chance to see in any science fiction show these very minor characters that are thrust into these very major events. And
what I love about it is, I'm sorry. Go ahead. One of the things I love about it is that they never explain what is actually happening outside the station, like why these people are attacking, what this alien invasion is about. We don't sort of really have much access to it, right? We since we're in Mac and Bo's perspective, we really only know what they know, which is, there's an alert. oh, there's some fighting. We have to go to our stations, right, and get ready for whatever is happening or whatever they're doing up there in the control room. Who knows what it is? And I think it's glorious.
What I love about their observations is that they basically take, they take our position, like in the show. We're our Mac and Bo, by and large. And you get to see Mac and Bo see all the different personalities from our perspective over the course of already 4.5 years. And when they saw Jakar and Londo arguing in a way, I loved when they say, like, how long do you think they've been married? Because they're a couple, they're like, they're like going at each other like an old married couple. And I love that they had a lunch break. They're talking about either spoo or hard salami sandwiches. It's like, how'd you get hard salami on the station? Yeah, I know a guy. Well, introduce me into him sometime, right? And then all of a sudden,
10 credits an ounce if you can believe
that, and like, this is why the Centauri's hair stands on end, because they're eating fresh spoo. So yeah, there are like all these just wonderful little moments that show you that there are so many things that are going on behind the scenes of Babylon 5, from the dock workers to the station mechanics. Mac and Bo actually got the targeting system of the CNC online because there was some type of rodent that was chewing away at Corwin Station.
Yep.
So it was just, and then they fell in love with Lockley, which was awesome. It's just a very normal, very extraordinary day with very normal people involved in it. And I think that's brilliant storytelling.
One of the guys we never get a name for is the guy in third space who's like flying around in the construction Star Fury.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. I don't even know if they call it a Star Fury, but it looks, it's sort of like the
it's like a worker bee
maintenance version.
Yeah.
The worker bee Star Fury. Right. And he's sort of just out there with like his little hat on, and moving his little construction arms and, building things and cleaning up from the space battles that have been happening out there. Like somebody has to go clean that mess up. Right. And there's the guy who's going to go do it. And so it has a lot more of a world building aspect, right? That you don't always get in some other shows because they're always focused on whoever the stars are and what they're doing. And that's one of the things I like about it. But the banter with those two guys was just tremendous.
Oh, it's very natural and it was just very, it was comforting in a way that there are guys there. In Babylon 5 is structured where you have kind of like, the rings of elitism. You have the ambassadors, you have the officers, they have their specific stations, but then you have down below in the lurkers where people who tried to make a go of it at Babylon 5 never really succeeded. You got to find some place to be able to survive and eat and work and try and eke out a living. So that's something that I think was also really interesting about seeing all the different sections of Babylon 5, that there was literally a poverty level where people, there were organized crime, there was nefarious acts, there was murder, there was all different types of, very unsavory people down there, human and alien alike. And you would think that the station would try and dispose of that kind of element, but it didn't, because for some odd reason, that was just, it's kind of like your steerage on the Titanic, there was just a reason for you to be there.
Yeah, it's, the Lumati had a different interpretation of what was going on there, for sure, if you remember that particular episode.
Yeah, right. Right. Yes, sir, 3 bags full. I remember that episode.
But going back to one of the things we were talking about earlier, which is that because Joe was really writing herd on all the scripts and was writing most of them himself, he was able to get those scripts out on time. And that enabled the actors to have time with the material that sometimes they don't get in a lot of other shows where they're getting pages like the night before they got to go do them. And one of the anecdotes I remembered hearing about this particular episode was that the two actors, Lawrence LeJean, Ray O'Connor, they got the pages enough in advance that they were able to, on their own, just the two of them, actually go and block scenes together, just for themselves, to be together and to practice their lines. So that when they were actually on set and filming, like, that was not their first time together.
Right.
Like, they had actually rehearsed it, which in television is an unheard of luxury, right? To be actually to be able to rehearse extensively is not something that you normally get to do. And I think that came through in the episode with those two guys too.
Oh yeah, you believe that they were already like partners of a sense. They had the banter, they had the timing, because that's what happens if you don't have time to practice. You're just kind of like rehearsing the lines, and you have X amount of time to be able to execute your scenes. So you're doing the best you can, but you miss that ability to be able to actually forge a relationship with someone, to understand their timing, their ins and outs, how to drop in a line when they finish their line, things like that.
Let's take a look at a darker episode. In fact, an episode that I will usually pull out when people will say, show me one episode of the show to determine if I should watch it or not. Mm-hmm. And this is usually what I'll give them. I'll be curious to see if you would agree with that assessment or not. And that's Passing Through Gethsemane, with the remarkable Brad Dourif and Louis Turenne as guest stars, where, of course, we have these monks who take up on the station, and we have the story of Brother Edward, who turns out was actually not a nice guy in a prior life. Mm-hmm. So what about this episode made it special to you, Norman? Why did it make your list?
Well, I think it's one of those, another type of Star Trek episodes where the episode asks you, the audience member, and engages you in the question of, would you be able to forgive? And what actually happens to somebody whose life has been pre-programmed for them? So in this instance, what John is talking about with Brother Edward is that Brother Edward, at one point in time in his life, was a convicted serial killer. His name was Charlie, the Black Rose Killer. And he was sentenced to the mind wipe. The mind wipe is a procedure where the powers that be, in this case would be the Earth Alliance, would use a technique along with the Psi Corps telepathic investigations expert to make sure that your previous personality, the personality that committed all of these crimes, was blocked and erased from your mental ability to be able to reconnect with that personality. Supplanted by a pre-programmed personality, in this case, the personality of a priest who has this pre-programmed history of doing good and serving the public trust. What happens if that mind wipe begins to fail? What happens if that barrier begins to break down? What happens when somebody who believes that they have experienced a lifetime of serving the people and the good begins experiencing his former life? And who gives somebody the right to be able to do that to somebody, even if they feel that the sentence of the mind wipe is done for the good of the public? So you tear down the entire life of somebody who believed he was doing good. And in this case, these were the victims of the people that Charlie's the Black Rose Killer, murdered. Mm-hmm. These people went after him with a vengeance, found him in essentially what was the Earth Alliance's version of witness protection, and made sure via a Centauri telepath that they were able to exact their revenge on somebody who only really knew that his entire life was about serving the people. How do those two elements in a narrative come to a satisfactory conclusion? And they don't, with the added benefit of the person who eventually murders the Black Rose Killer in vengeance for the family that Charlie originally slain. He gets mind wiped, and he gets turned into somebody who serves the public trust. Can you forgive this person for what he did? And will you allow him to serve the public moving forward? That is a remarkable episode on so many layers of challenging the audience's own ability to address their own morality at the time.
One interesting perspective that I heard on this episode, and I'll be curious to hear your take on it, Norman, is that when you rewatch the show, right? So a first-time viewer wouldn't have any access to this, but when you rewatch the show, it actually becomes a foreshadowing of the death of Kosh in a way. Because when you think about interludes and examinations, Kosh knew that the shadows were going to come for him. Why is he just hanging out in his quarters waiting for them? And yet that's the whole idea that Brother Edward talks about when he's having his conversation with Delenn and Lanier, saying he didn't have to be there, mm-hmm. right? But he waited there intentionally. And so we have sort of this same sort of moment with Kosh a few episodes later in Interludes and Examinations that I think is really an interesting mirror. Now, I'm wondering, in your interpretation, is this just fangasming, or do you believe that there's a real echo that's going on here?
For anyone that is not as well-versed in Christian or Catholic doctrine or history, Gethsemane is the moment in time where Jesus waited for the Roman soldiers to take him into custody after Judas's betrayal. He waited there because he knew eventually of what was going to happen. And if he didn't allow what was eventually going to happen, his incarceration, his torture, that is eventually his crucifixion, then the purpose for why he was sent to serve humanity would have failed. He needed to be there in order for these events to happen. Brother Edward needed to be there in order for him to be able to come to terms with, I escaped justice. The mind wipe allows somebody to escape justice. Their mind is arranged in such a way where they never have to see the consequences of their action again. And once he realized what he did, and once he confirmed that by the station computer, he realized that I was not punished justly for what I did. And I have to wait for this mob to take me because this is the cup that I cannot let pass in front of me. I have to be able to suffer the consequences of my actions. Kosh did the same thing. Kosh knew that once he got involved, once he got the Vorlons involved, then one of two things was going to happen. The shadows were going to come for him because he exposed himself and he knew that he was going to die, but he had to stay on the station in order to perhaps pay for the indifference of the Vorlons that he was the representative for. He knew that in very many other circumstances he could have interceded on the behalf of the Earth Alliance, or at least on behalf of Sheridan and Delenn, and he didn't. He was following orders by his government. So if he's like, if I'm going down, I'm going to go down and I'm going to own up for everything that I wasn't able to do, because even the Vorlons can be afraid of making the right or wrong choice. And I think that's why Kosh stayed.
As I've been talking to a friend of mine who's watching the show for the first time, one of the things I told him is that every now and then, maybe 2 or 3 times a season, there'll be an episode that it's best to not think of as a TV episode, but to think of as kind of a stage play that we just happen to have filmed. Mm-hmm. And a couple of examples of that, which we may or may not talk about, are Comes the Inquisitor. Definitely a stage play that just happened to get filmed. And The Sky Full of Stars has a little bit of that. Eyes has a little bit of that. But I certainly think the best example of that is Intersections in Real Time, which is the two-person play, really, between Ray Burke as the investigator and Bruce Boxleitner as Captain Sheridan in the interrogation room, and a whole episode devoted to their conversation in really a very theatrical sort of way. I'd love to know what your take on that particular episode is.
I think that it is a tour de force performance by both Bruce Boxleitner and Ray Burke. I think that Joe was really trying to establish how far John Sheridan is willing to go in order to not only defend his principles, but very much like in Comes the Inquisitor, Sebastian could have been taken as the Ray Burke part, as the investigator, as the interrogator to Delenn. When Joe is at his best, Joe tries to find a character and he tries to put them in a crucible and burn away everything until he gets the ultimate truth of that character. And that's what this episode is with Ray Burke slowly chipping away at what he believes is a successful interrogation, but then John Sheridan still having enough of his own agency to say, you know what? I understand that I'm being tortured. I understand that there's the possibility of me being executed here. But very much like, I'm going to cross the streams here, John.
Sure, go for it.
Very much like Captain Sisko at the end, or I should say Benny at the end of Far Beyond the Stars, I think why John Sheridan was able to plant his feet where he was able to at the end of this episode was because he believes in the idea of what he's doing. You can destroy the body, like Delenn said. You can destroy those who serve after me. You can't destroy the idea of what we are trying to do here, the fight for independence, to destroy the governmental, rot and cancer that is President Clark's, his presidency, because the idea of being able to free a people from that type of governmental poison is greater than any one person. It's greater than any one man. If Sheridan fell, somebody else would take his place. So he had all the bargaining power because you can't destroy the idea that he created. You can't destroy the movement that he created. And then in doing so, Joe was able to plant probably one of the most significant through lines in a lot of his writing. There's a comic passage in one of his Captain America books where someone said that, someone says you move, and then Captain America says, no, you plant your feet like a tree and say, no, you move. And that's where Sheridan says that, I can beat the system every single time I say no. Every single time I say no, I plant my feet that much further into the ground and say, no, you, the system, move. You, the system, move around me because my ideals cannot be bought, cannot be broken, and cannot be destroyed. You cannot destroy an idea, the way that Benny said at the end of Far Beyond the Stars. And that is where you saw the real true turning point of the Civil War, because he was the apex of it. And if you can't change him, you can't change the tide.
It really is just a very special episode, and it just hits on every sort of cylinder, right? It's really got a powerful, powerful message about, just as you indicated, about how we can actually change things in the world. And the performances and the writing and just, the limbo set that you're sort of in, right? This black sort of endless void where they're doing this interrogation. I could literally watch that little bit where the guy talks about mustard on his sandwich.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I could watch just that little bit on a loop and be completely enthralled with it. But then you watch the interplay between these guys, and it really is just two actors really just delivering on every possible cylinder and just punching the performance out of the screen and into your soul. It's really just a glorious episode.
There's a lot of echo there too, and a lot of spiritual energy from Chain of Command, when with Patrick Stewart and David Warner, in that same type of interchange that they had as was it Gul Madred and Captain Picard.
Yes.
Yeah. Just two incredible actors allowed to just be in this completely stripped down setting and just focus on the acting. I mean, if any performance just wavered slightly, you would probably feel a little bit differently about this episode, but you're just so fixated on the small things like the mustard, like the pastrami, like the Drazi coming in and being tortured, having Sheridan's, his focus, Wither and Wayne, and then the galvanization of his entire being at the very end. It's just, and then reset the clock because we're doing this all over again with a whole other interrogator. We all know how long that took. And all of a sudden the process starts from square one.
Yep. And
you're left thinking, can Sheridan hold out indefinitely? Can his belief hold out indefinitely?
Yeah. And, it's an unanswered question because we all know what happens, right? Mm-hmm. So he certainly wasn't put to the ultimate test because fortunately his friends came for him. An episode we didn't actually plan, but comes to mind that we're having this discussion. One of my personal favorites, and I'd love to have your take on it because I think it fits into this sort of these weird one-off stage plays in a way, but this one is not so much, and it's the Deconstruction of Falling Stars, the season 4 finale. Mm-hmm. A very weird episode in a lot of ways, and sort of the very definition of why Babylon 5 is different from like almost any other show, because the grand scope of what the storytelling they're doing is something that a lot of other shows would run away from because they don't want to be locked into anything.
Right.
And it really just blew my mind when I even think about it. And, all the different parts of the show, the episode really just touched me in different ways, but especially the ending with that sort of Vorlon human type guy getting into that little ranger ship as he departs Earth for the last time. It's sort of ugly cry time for me in some ways. But I'm curious as to how you feel that one falls into this sequence with Comes the Inquisitor, Sky Full of Stars, intersections in real time, and sort of the stage play aspect that Joe seems to love.
What I like about this episode is that it was, if the behind the scenes was kind of like a little bit force majeure capstone of what could have been the very end of Babylon 5.
Right.
And we won't get into Sleeping in Light unless you want me to start ugly crying, because that will happen.
We'll talk about that in a little bit.
But what I love about Deconstruction of Falling Stars is that it's all set up with no one's going to remember what we did 100 years later. And then we get to 100 years later, and everything that Sheridan and Delenn did was either preserved or perverted. And I love the fact that even, and this is where you have to be careful with holodeck technology. No matter how good your holodeck technology can be, if you don't have the right systems in place, somebody as smart as recreating Garibaldi's own personality, can work against you. You know, you created all of these people to try and dismantle the actual impetus of creating this Earth Interstellar Alliance, and you're trying to besmirch the reputations of why John Sheridan was who he was. Mm-hmm. Did he really create the Interstellar Alliance for a force of good? Was it more of kind of like a fascist regime 100 years later? And then all of a sudden you have somebody like Garibaldi's personality come in and just upend the entire thing. So I know that I'm throwing a lot of information at people. You just have to watch it. But at the end, John, to your point, seeing how the story has manifested over the course of decades, centuries, even a millennia, I think is really beautiful, because my favorite part of the episode is when after the Great Burn, after this nuclear holocaust that happened, thanks Garibaldi, mm-hmm. that the Rangers were still there. They were always on the outskirts of trying to make sure that whatever vision this was would survive. And I like the fact that in the end, there was this hybrid Vorlon Ranger human kind of character that allowed the history of this particular era of time to be preserved when the galaxy was on the verge of its own destruction by the explosion of the sun. So, or of a star.
Our solar system.
Our solar system, yeah. So the history that John and Delenn were talking about, it was just like, you know, we're not going to be alive to see it. Who knows where it's going to go? But we know where it's going to go because we're seeing it from the point of view of historical records of this particular character. So it's nice that, I mean, it is fixed. I mean, you fix the history of Babylon 5, but it's no different than, say, fixing the history of, say, Star Trek in Discovery, where we fixed that the Federation's back 900 years later. You know, that's a fixed point in time. John Sheridan's death that came 20 years after, you know, he was killed at Zahadum. That's a fixed point in time.
Yep.
It's the storytelling, the deftness of storytelling and the choices you make for those characters in between those fixed points in time. That's where the fertile ground is. It's like going back into Star Trek Brave New World or Strange New Worlds. We know that Captain Pike captained the Enterprise. We know that eventually he and Spock are going to get to the Talosians and Talos 4. What happens in between? It's the writing that governs how good the quality of that series is going to be. It doesn't matter the fixed points in time. It matters what happens with the characters and how they get there, I think.
There are certain moments in the episode that are burned into my head, and I think one of those is during the academic discourse panel, when Delenn shows up and she says, John Sheridan was a good and decent man who cared about the world even when the world cared nothing for him. And the interviewer turns to her and says, you came all the way to say just that? And she turns to him and says, you came just as far to say even less. Mm-hmm. And I just, the power of that moment is something that I think actually changed my thinking about how to think about my life. You know, it really is something in the show that I took into myself. And it was just glorious, just a glorious moment. And when any art lets people access something that they can really use in thinking about the world and their own life, I think that's the best as it can get, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. All right, so let's talk about what I would call the power duo of Babylon 5 episodes. This first one, Zahadum. I will often explain it to people who've never seen the show as sort of the axis that's at the center of the wheel. There's the show before Zahadum and the show after. Now, you had said Severed Dreams was that, and you had made a sort of a statement that Severed Dreams was really that. I would place it more here, mm-hmm. because this is the moment where Delenn was used to sort of having all the cards and doling out information that only people needed to know. And this is where Sheridan surpasses all of that. And basically, I got to derail this for just a second, because I saw one of those things where it was like, describe one of the best episodes of a show in the worst way possible. And I said, Sheridan has a meeting, leaves angrily.
That's hilarious. I love that.
Which is pretty much right.
Yeah.
A business meeting ends badly.
The broadest of the broad strokes, but yes.
But everything in this episode really, what's really interesting to me about it, and I'm going to turn it over to you for your take in just a second, is how the shadows are just so earnest. Up to this point, we've seen the Vorlons who sort of come across as like these kindly people. Like for some reason, they read as like people we should like, but yet Kosh tortures poor Talia. He blows up our shot at immortality. He's pretty much canonically a jerk, but yet we're supposed to like him. Whereas the Shadows show up and they're like, here's the story, here's the deal, here's what we're about. We'd like you to come join us. Like, they are way more forthright and simple. And I'm not saying that they're on the right side of the argument, but in the way that they present, I found it to be incredibly refreshing after dealing with the Vorlons for 3 seasons. So I'd love to get your take on it.
Well, I think that, you build up the expectations of the Shadow's reputation. They're guilty by association with somebody, say, like Morden. Because when Morden finally comes on the scene, and I love Ed Wasser is awesome. The more evil he gets, the slicker his hair back gets.
Oh, yeah.
Or the bigger his quaff. But all that beside the point. When Morden comes on the scene, he basically is always cast in shadow, cast with some type of aspersion about him. It's either the way he's angled or the way he's lit. And his mannerism is like this very slick and very pervasive used car salesman, right? He doesn't really force anything on you. He asks you the very 2 important questions in the canon of Babylon 5. Who are you and what do you want? He allows you to make that decision for yourself, which is what basically the Shadows want for anybody, any lesser being, any lesser race. Who are you? Define yourself as a species, and what do you want? Do you want to stay stagnant? Do you want to grow? Do you want to invade other worlds? Do you want to, increase the breadth of your influence and your power? We can help you with that. But you have to ask us. We only want small things in return. So really, the lovely thing about the Vorlons and the Shadows is this incredibly intricate chess game played on such a huge galactic level, even to the point where individual choices actually do matter to the Vorlon and the Shadows. Like you said, in Deathwalker, they wanted the opportunity to even remotely investigate the serum that Jador made. But the Vorlons made that decision for you. They destroyed her and her ability to create the anti-agapic. No one ever talked about it. And he's part of the governing council of Babylon 5's ambassadors, but he just took it upon himself. Mm-hmm. And we also know that the Vorlons aren't really on the up and up because you're right. He does torture. He tortures Lita for sure.
Yeah.
As in a way. And then when Darth Kosh Olkesh comes on the scene, he is not a nice Vorlon. Nowhere near what we expected with Kosh.
No. But I was referring to the scene where in the episode with Zima. And the vicar, mm-hmm. right, where he tortures Talia with the different memories, and the guy's recording it and all that. I mean, he was straight up torturing her
for the future,
right?
Yeah, right. The future of how powerful did our human telepath experiment become, right? Exactly.
Which you don't know until you sort of get further along in the show, right? You don't understand sort of why he's doing any of this.
Exactly. But then that goes, this is a little bit later. So going back to Zahadum, what I liked about, you had Anna Sheridan, obviously, that she was manipulated so that she would become a better ambassador for John Sheridan, at least one that he was a little bit more interested in following to see where this leads, because she's been manipulated by the Shadows to be able to use their technology to be able to survive their ships. And then you meet this character, Justin, who was completely just out of left field. You have basically kind of like an emaciated Wilford Brimley, and he's just sitting down there with a cup of tea and say, "Hey, John,
yeah, would you like some tea?
Yeah, this is who we're about. No, this is what the Vorlons told you about us. Don't worry about the spiky, shadowy, 6-legged, 8-legged creatures that we have, as our foot soldiers." But when you say something like that in science fiction, I can't help but bring a little bit of Star Trek in there, because that's how we felt about the Horta. Right? That's in Devil in the Dark, we always believed that the Horta was something that was menacing, that's something that was terrible, and something that needed to be dealt with physically or violently. That's because of our perception that was built up about the Horta from the miners. Is that the same way with the Shadows? All we see of these Shadow soldiers and the Shadow ships are them flexing their power, but because they look a certain way, does that make them wrong? Now, of course, divisively, that's just who we are. J.R.R. Tolkien created Ungoliant and Shelob because he had this innate hatred of spiders. So he made spiders the great evil of his lore. Mm-hmm. But if you look at a Shadow soldier at the end, you remember when they reconciled and you had the Vorlon and the Shadow? When the Shadow looked up at Loria and he said, "Will you come with us?" It was like
a child talking to his parent,
exactly.
Right? Like, please, Daddy.
Felt for him, right?
Yeah.
And I think that you have this huge misconception of who is in the right here again. Which power has the authority over the other? The Vorlons made a very, very interesting play at order is good, peace is good, everything's status quo, stay where you are, you won't get hurt, that's fine. That's one type of parenting. The shadows are like
helicopter parenting.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
The Vorlons are helicopter parents.
We're going to remove the choices for you so you don't have to make those hard choices. But there's no growth there. The shadows are all about, the way that Justin was explaining it, is like if you kick over the anthill, you just have a stronger anthill that is built up on top of it. If you give people the ability to choose their destiny for themselves, will there be war? Yes. Will there be strife? Yes. But below that, and rising above that, would be a stronger, more powerful version of its former self. Isn't that what you want? Don't you want to evolve and grow and challenge yourselves and be the best version of yourself possible? That takes a lot of struggle. It takes a lot of pain. That takes a lot of sweat. That takes a lot of war. Who's right?
Without World War I, we wouldn't have Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, exactly. Well, in that right? case,
I guess that's what they're getting.
That's
at,
like
right?
a silver lining. He's like, think of all the tangential or adjunct, circumstances that happened because humanity in and of itself was challenged by great periods of chaos and despair. Right? That's kind of like where Star Trek thinking is. Because of the World War III and the eugenics wars, the Federation was born. We have to reach out and go beyond the stars because we can't afford to be able to the catastrophes of the past. Without those catastrophes of the past, that wouldn't have happened. So now you have this struggle of, if it's like the Earth Alliance, or at least with Sheridan, if the shadows didn't actually challenge you to become better, stronger, more agile, more mobile, more collectively, working together, look at all of what you've accomplished because of that.
So it sounds like you're on the side of the shadows here, Norman.
I am just an observer. I'm on the side of the soul hunters.
Well, you're making a pretty strong case here.
Well, I'm a big, it's like nothing never, things shouldn't ever be just status quo. If we don't grow, if we don't learn, then what are we doing, right? We're not pursuing anything. Now, of course, there are limits to that. You can't just go, I feel like growing as a person, I'll go just murder 20 people. That's not what we're talking about, but if there's a way for me to be able to compete until I further and better myself. And if somebody's feelings get hurt during that normal, healthy, legal competition, that's the point of competition, to prove to yourself how better you can be. And maybe you might be able to inspire those people to say, how did you do that? Where did you learn that? Can I learn that from you? And then they can be the better person that they want to be. But it doesn't work that way if people are like, you know what? You all get an award. The Vorlons are like, everyone gets an award. You get an ice cream, you get an ice cream, you get an ice cream, but the sprinkles are dangerous, so we're just going to take those away from the equation. Everything's vanilla.
So the Vorlons are giving out participation trophies.
They are. And it just, in the form of just making sure everything is status quo. Everything is in order, right? It's very Star Wars, man. It's like the Vorlons are the Jedi Order and the Shadows are the Sith, right? It's the conflict of order and chaos, or towing the line and struggle, status quo and struggle. I hate to say it because we're talking about it in a galactic terminology, but it's very human. It's very moral, humanly moral.
It's interesting that you bring this up because you made sort of a reference to sports a little bit ago. And as a parent, we do all we can to make sure that our kids are safe and to make sure that they're not going to get hurt and all this kind of thing. And then my kid had to pick a sport in middle school, and he picked wrestling. And so we started going to these wrestling matches, and they were sort of these all-day affairs on Saturday. Starting at 11 o'clock and going until 4 in the afternoon. And people are coming with, chairs and, umbrellas. And it was a whole day event. And you talk to some of these other parents and you see how they are when it's like, get out there with that aggression, right? Focus that aggression on dominating your opponent, right? And it's like, it's literally that. It is that kind of parenting that the Shadows were about, right? Mm-hmm. It's like focusing that aggression, right? Control, domination, right? Using it in constructive ways to achieve a goal. Mm-hmm. And then you have sort of the Vorlon side, which is, make sure to wear your safety equipment, don't do anything wrong, right? Make sure to wear your helmet when you're biking, right? And so as a parent, just dealing with other parents, I see this kind of behavior all the time, and it always reminds me of Babylon 5. I realize that's sort of strange, but it was only something that came to me after I had kids that I started to see this everywhere. And I started talking to some of these wrestling parents who were very hardcore.
So does that leave the first ones as kind of like the crazy aunts and uncles that just kind of hover off to the side?
Yeah, they were the ones who were manning the snack bar to get funds to go to nationals.
Yeah, he's like, he'll be all right. tape an aspirin to it. He'll be fine.
All right, let's talk about, I got just two more to hit you with. I want to talk about And the Rock Cried Out, No Hiding Place, with the wonderful William Forward as Rifa. I was a huge fan of the actor in the show. His character, not so much, but I loved the actor in the role. Certainly a very interesting episode. We have sort of these various religious people who were forming sort of an underground communications network and sort of formulating the resistance to President Clark. This is one that you definitely wanted to talk about. So let me turn it over to you, Norman, and tell me what about this particular episode made you want to talk about it.
Well, And the Rock Cried Out, No Hiding Place is my favorite episode of Babylon 5. And there is a difference. I know that there's a distinction, which I think is like the best episode of Babylon 5 and my favorite episode of Babylon 5. This, for me, it brings home everything that I love about the show, and it adds a little bit more to that. And one of the things that's most significant for me in this episode is that you actually get to see Jakar and Londo start to work together again towards something. At this stage, we don't know what, but I love the fact that Londo's hatred for Rifa overshadows his hatred for the Narn. Because Rifa took something from him personally. He took Lady Adira from him. In a way that Londo didn't expect, and in the same way that Londo, subversively attacked Rifa through poison, the old way, the old Centauri traditional way. And Rifa answered in kind, and Londo didn't see it coming. So Londo's like, if I didn't see that coming, he's not going to see this coming. And the one thing that a Centauri would never, ever, ever in their wildest dreams think of would be the Centauri allying themselves with the Narn in order to take out one of their own. Why would they do that? And that it poses the question, does Londo really hate Jakar that much, or did he dig himself into a hole so deep that he couldn't escape? Because he and Jakar were at wildly polar opposite positions at the very beginning of Midnight on the Firing Line. They were just two ambassadors that were caught up in their own machinations. Londo was a buffoon and Jakar was a warmonger. But now, the act of working together is something even greater. Jakar found the ability to put aside his differences, personal, religious, or otherwise, in order to save a handful of lives of his own people. And he thinks that that's worth it. He thinks that that is worth the sacrifice that he is making. Because once you create that momentum, what else can you do? And Londo's like, you know what? My personal revenge is worth more than what I'm giving to Jakar. But at the same time, though, it's starting to help me dig myself out of this situation that I couldn't see myself out of, at least for the time being. At least for the time being. And there was a detente that was formed when we finally saw that he and Jakar were working together for something greater than each other's own purposes. But I also love then the episode where the minister at the end was talking to Sheridan in his office, and Sheridan says, I don't want to burden Delenn with any of my problems. And then there was this wonderful anecdote about, when Adam felt overburdened, God created Eve for him so that they could share a partnership. And he's like, they're talking about a partnership of being able to lean on each other, trust each other, and share these collective experiences with each other. I loved that. It was just a very quiet moment. And then my personal favorite moment in this episode is when they overlaid the track of the gospel music of No Hiding Place down here, and the Rock Cried Out, No Hiding Place, to when Rifa was basically running for his life. Yeah. And then the Narn just literally pummel him to dust, except for his head, because they need that for, identification purposes. But the rest is yours. Oh my God. The sequence of that scene just gives me chills, even just thinking about it. No hiding place down here. And then Rifa just running for his life. Oh, God, it's so good, John. It's so good.
It is so good. One of the parts of the episode that I always have a strong attachment to is the whole section with Veer. Mm-hmm. In that Londo lies to him, sends him to Jakar. Jakar talks to Veer. Jakar is already in league with Londo, knows that Veer is lying to him because it was all part of the plan.
Right.
And just sort of goes along with it. And you see Veer being put through the absolute ringer. And it has to be done because he knew that Rifa had a telepath with him and was going to go after him. And it just had to be done. But my heart just breaks for the guy. And Stephen First did just such a fantastic job in the role. And I really felt for him, that he really was just a cog caught up in the great big wheel at that particular time in the episode.
I think it was a great learning experience for Veer. I think Veer was like, you know what, no matter how far I think I can trust or no matter how open my heart, Londo has taught me a lot about the real world, quote unquote, and a lot about the expectations of who I know and who I can trust. And I love, when Veer's like, he was going to kill me. You're not important enough to kill. Right? But I'm important enough to do your dirty work. And I think that that's where Veer starts learning, or at least starts experiencing his path to being an emperor.
Indeed.
This is his education. I think that in many ways, like Malaria is a very perverted version of Miyagi. He's teaching Veer what he needs to know to survive. If Veer wants to pursue any type of career in the royal court, if you don't learn from Londo, who has lived his life ever since he could remember in the royal court, who are you going to learn it from? Because at least in some modicum of the strict definition of trust, Veer can somewhat trust Londo. They have a rapport, but Londo's going to be, he's going to take the hard parenting approach and like, you know what? Sometimes you got to learn the hard way. It's the only way I can teach you that makes any sense. Oh, but by the way, you're going to be doing me a service, but you're going to be getting educated in the process. This is how it works with the Centauri royal court. Why would you think it doesn't work any other way?
And, if Veer hadn't have gone through those lessons, I don't think he would have been in the right place to help Londo in season 4 when it comes to Cartagia and all of that. I don't think he would have been ready if he'd have been protected.
This is building that backbone that Veer would eventually need to have when he rose to the rank of emperor. He needed this. There's the side of Veer that's the very genuine, sweet, very open, honest, very, approachable and accessible person. That serves him in one way as the emperor, but then there's the other side which knows how the court works, how the machinations of the Centauri politics work, and he needs to be aware of that. That's the training he's received, but it doesn't necessarily erase the person that he was. It just builds upon that for future reference.
So you made a reference to Veer becoming emperor, and when I look at the great big arc of Babylon 5 over the course of its 5-year run, one of the things that I just love the most, I truly do love the most, is that at the end of the story in Sleeping in Light, which we'll turn to next, it's the two blue-collar bros who really end up on top, Garibaldi and Veer, which is like not what you expect, right? You don't get like the great big hero savior, right? No, he dies. You get, sort of these other characters, right? Who, Ivanova sort of ends up in an unhappy sort of retirement, right? And you get Marcus ends up in a freezer, right? And so these heroic characters all end up in these like very not so great places. And it's the blue collar bros who end up, living the life of Riley at the end of the show.
Yeah.
Which is just, it really subverts the whole expectation that you have, right? That like someone's going to be crowned king of the universe and they lived happily ever after. And it is most certainly not that. And it ends on that somber note in Sleeping in Light, really, which I would categorize as probably one of the best series finales I've ever seen. But I'd love to know where it falls in your ranking.
Well, in terms of series finales, in my limited knowledge of all the fandom that are out there, from what I have seen, it's by and large, by far, in every stretch of the measure of the word, the best series finale I've ever seen. For these reasons. One, because exactly what you said, the heroes that we thought were that had this trajectory towards this more heroic end did not. John Sheridan did not have a heroic ending. Delenn did not have a heroic ending, per se, because she lost John. Ivanova, who has been at the forefront in Sheridan and Sinclair's right hand for the entirety of seasons 1 through 4, did not have a happy ending. She lost Marcus, and she is broken. And sure, Delenn gave her a second chance at leading the An Lashak, but her life trajectory didn't really start from, negative to positive. That's why I love Garibaldi and Veer at the end. They had, especially Garibaldi. Garibaldi was, and still is, an alcoholic. Someone who has been mentally tampered with more times than he is comfortable to even remember. But then he really just kind of buckles down and said, this is what I want out of life. I want to love a good woman. I want to be able to wake up the next day, recognize that it's a good day, live a good life, go to sleep, and wash, rinse, and repeat. And he got that. He got that because he fought through it all. And he saw the error of his ways. He tried to make up for it. And sure, having Lise inherit all of Edgar's Industries, finances and things of that nature. But look what he did with that. He turned it all around. He turned something that was a little bit more of a clandestine organization into something that was a little bit more on the positive side. But that's the thing. Like he was just a security guard. Zach even kind of came out on top, right? He ends up working for Veer. Yeah, he's like you said, the blue collar guys end up doing probably the most significant things, right? And I love that about it. It's just that they got their second chance. And their second chance paid off just a little bit bigger than most other people's second chances. But it just goes to show you that Joe's like, you know what? Not everything is tied up with a pretty bright bow. Life is life. This is just one small slice of the microcosm of the macrocosm of the Babylon 5 universe. And people move on. Life moves on. And Delenn will always get up at sunrise. I can't talk about this. She'll always reach out with that sunrise and think that John's by her side and experience that perfect Sunday drive over and over and over again. Oh man. Whoa.
I feel you, bro.
I tell you, no, it hits me so hard every single time because they thought that this was like the last time that they were going to be together. Some of these performances were just right on the sleeve, right? The emotion was right on their sleeve, especially Bruce and Mira. The scene where he said that, good night, my love, the brightest star in my sky. Oh my God. If you're not in tears by that time that scene's happened, unless you're already in tears, I don't know what to tell you.
You've got a heart of stone for sure.
Yeah. But it's a beautiful end, which was recorded prior to the filming of season 5. But it's a beautiful end and a very, just appropriate capstone bookend moment for where these characters ended up. And small detail, I love how they used the very first time you saw that character on screen to the very last time you saw that character on screen in the credits, or what that character turned into. So you saw like the journey of their arc, and you see it very clearly in, say, Jakar and Londo, right? Jakar and Londo, the way that they've changed so physically over time. It's just, it's breathtaking.
I was reminded of that just recently because, as I made reference to several times, a friend of mine is going through the first watch of the show. And I think maybe a couple episodes into season 1, he's like, oh, so Jakar's the villain character. I was like, yeah, he's the villain character. Sure. Just keep on going with that, bro.
Right.
And and let's see where we end up. Right. It's just that you are really in for a roller coaster with every one of these characters. And even the ones that, look like comic relief, like Veer, they're not going to end up that way. Right. They have a very, very different ending. And
or stalwartly heroic like Lanier.
Yeah. Yeah. And he has his stumbles, of course, throughout the way, along the way as well. And it's just a very satisfying conclusion, and I think when I look at some of the other finales to sort of some of these shows that have had a lot of activity around them and a lot of buzz and chatter, and a lot of them just disappointed me in some ways. Like I'll never get over the ending of Lost or of The Sopranos, both of which I was incredibly let down by, and I know that some of them were described as, especially The Sopranos was like a brave artistic moment, and I heap derision upon it to myself.
Oh, John, don't stop believing.
Yeah. You know what? I'll tell you a funny story. I used to work for the cable company out here. My wife and I were watching the series finale of The Sopranos, and when the screen went black, I said, "You hear that sound, honey? That's the sound of everyone picking up their phone right now, dialing 383-4000 and saying, why in the world did my TV cut out?" Like the phones just went berserk at my work right now because everyone thinks we cut it off, right? And we didn't. It's what the broadcaster sent, right?
Yeah.
And that's literally where my head was. So maybe I'm influenced by that because I used to work for the cable company, and I just realized what a nightmare that was to send out a black screen.
Oh, wow.
But so that just might be a little too much of my own personal story mixed in there. But I just never felt a sense of satisfaction with a lot of shows when I watched the conclusions as I did with this one.
Yeah.
And it stays with you. It stays with you for sure.
Yep.
The level of pathos that the episode has, it really just is unmatched in my opinion. Which is why I really have to ask you, Norman, we've spent quite a bit of time talking about the show. You were very eager to do this when I pitched you on it. You do your live cast show. I mean, obviously, Babylon 5 is quite a substantial part of your fandom life. So my question is, why does the show matter to you so much?
I think it is because for any of the other fandoms that I've really enjoyed out there, and I am deep in so many of them, like Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who, Blake 7, Space 1999. I love them all. I love Highlander. I love fantasy. I love so many fandoms. But I think when you take it for a pound for pound comparison, Babylon 5 from beginning to end, and we're not going to talk Crusade because I just want to talk about the 5-year arc.
Yeah.
It's the only series that I've watched that consistently delivers some type of, or evokes some type of emotional response from me in some form or another. Some episodes and fandoms that I watch, I could just, yes, even TKO. I know you were going to ask that, but even TKO. But I think that for the most part, not only does it really capitalize on the serialization of the format, but in doing so, being able to reference back to an alien strange prop in season 1 and how significant that is going to play in season 4 is something that I've never seen before in the history of television. How something so perhaps even ubiquitous or benign. Episode of the week moment. Right. Oh, here's a thing, right? It was just something for Dr. Laura to be able to exact her plan to stop Carl Mueller. That was it. Right? We're going to pack that away. Oh, and also it did help bring back
Garibaldi's moment.
But
sure.
That started just ramping up the potential for something like this. And you don't see it again until now, right? Until season 4, right? And I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't already been spoiled by this.
Just so you know, Norman, I'm going to put a wrapper on this. And one of the things we're going to put out right at the beginning is we are going to spoil the hell out of the show.
This is
so
spoiled.
We're going to assume you've seen it.
Yeah,
so if you have not seen the episode, you should not be listening to this. And I say that in the strongest possible way.
True.
So, but yeah, no worries about that.
But so something as insignificant as it may have been, it turned out to be wildly significant in the end because of what Marcus did to sacrifice himself to save Ivanova, and that's the kind of thing that it just blows your mind when you watch that. Like, how did he plan that out? How did he plot that out so many years in advance? How do you do that? Where does that come from? Did you always think about that, or is it just something that popped into your head because you needed it at the time? So subversion of expectations is something that I really do enjoy in terms of the narrative, the narrative and the fandoms that I invest myself in. And when something just really just challenges me, either from a moral perspective or a personal perspective or a storytelling perspective, it really takes it takes resident rent-free in my head for a long time. But I think that it's because Sleeping in Light was so powerful, and it really gave me the satisfactory conclusion of all the storylines and all the characters that have meant so much to me over the course of those 5 years. I feel like when I made that emotional connection with that episode, I was personally saying goodbye to these people. I was personally saying goodbye to these characters that have helped shape certain decisions of my life, quotes that still to me have the most significant value to my life. My favorite quote of Jakar is the sum of all tears quote. We are all the sum of our tears. Too few and the ground becomes infertile and nothing can grow. Too many and the best of us is washed away. My tears have come and gone. It's profound when you really look at the layering of that. Or Delen's Stardust, her quote, we're all star stuff. We are all the universe made manifest trying to figure itself out. I mean, these are like these grand soliloquies that JMS puts and peppers throughout all of the episodes. And you just sit back and you're like, what did I just experience? And what does that mean? And how does that affect you over time? Like I said, I've been watching this show since 1993, 94. And some of it has stuck with me so indelibly ever since. And, I don't illustrate that in the collection that I have. I don't really illustrate that in the less than eloquent colloquialisms that I bring to this podcast. But if for anything that I do bring to the Babylon 5 community, if you can hear one thing that I have to say, it's not exactly what I say, it's how I say it. I am so passionate about this show because this show brings out the passion in me.
Well, Norman, I've enjoyed our conversation, but I got to tell you that I have a gold channel alert coming through the Stellarcom.
Ooh.
It is now time for you to step into the Starfire Wheel and face the ultimate test in our Babylon 5-themed lightning round. Right, should you not only pass it, but survive it, the computer will award you an honorary title on behalf of our little show. Are you ready, Norman?
I am ready, and my heart is religious.
Computer, load the lightning round and prepare to record Norman's responses.
Simulation ready.
Question 1. Pledge loyalty to your caste, worker, warrior, or religious.
Worker.
Question 2. How do you take your spoo, fresh or aged?
Aged.
Question 3. Time to relax and refresh. Will it be a Zima or a Yoo-hoo?
Yoo-hoo.
Question 4. Who's chasing you, the Technomages, the Psychor, or the Drakh?
Technomages.
And finally, just for you, Norman, which is your favorite Zathras? Zathras, or Zathras?
Zathras.
Simulation complete. Computer, please compute the results and tell us if our guest has passed our lightning round test.
Analyzing simulation performance.
Norman, I am pleased to tell you that the station computer has calculated that you have passed our Babylon 5 lightning round, so congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
And now, our computer, who has analyzed your answers, will award you an honorary B5 title on behalf of our podcast. Computer, what title shall we award our guest?
Lurker Norman Lao is awarded the title of Lord Mayor of Down Below.
Lord High Mayor of Down Below. I can take that.
So, Norman, why don't you tell people how they can get in touch with you and especially where they can find your Zocalo livecast?
Well, you can find me online on Twitter and Instagram. My handle is Lounge Lizard. That's at LAONGE Lizard. And then you can find our Zocalo livecast, live chat on Twitter as well. That's Zocalo livecast. And then I do that show with my partner, Charlene Schmidt, and you can find her at Oh the Profanity. And we hold that show as best we can every Sunday afternoon at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
And that's on YouTube?
That is on YouTube. It is streamed live on YouTube where you can join in and participate in the conversation.
Fantastic. Norman, thank you so much for being part of this very special one-off episode of Lurker Profiles.
Thank you, John. It's my pleasure. And if there's one thing that I have never been really accused of, but I would take absolutely every discredit for or critique for, is being able to filibuster hours upon hours upon hours upon hours of Babylon 5 because I love doing so. I know you love doing so. And if that,
Indeed.
and if that's a title that someone would like to bestow upon me, Filibuster of Babylon 5, even though I love the mayor title, I would be happy to accept it.
Here ends this one-off special episode we are calling Lurker Profiles. And before we offer a quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your gold channel alerts of friendship, your wishes that this show be eaten by a Zarg, or selfie videos of yourself recreating the Ivanova Lumati sex dance to feedback at TrekProfiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter at TrekProfiles. Note that anything you send us may be used in the show, or it may be tossed into a giant chasm on the surface of Zahadum. This time, I leave you with a quote from Delenn, who in the episode A Distant Star said, quote, "Then I will tell you a great secret, Captain, perhaps the greatest of all time. The molecules of your body are the same molecules that make up this station and the nebula outside, that burn inside the stars themselves. We are star stuff, and we are the universe made manifest, trying to figure itself out." Close quote. Thanks for listening, and may God be between you and Han, all the empty places where you must walk.
This handcrafted podcast is brought to you by Stars and Sky Media Lab. It's cosmic.
Oh, interesting.
So,
okay.
Which I am one of those people that recommend you watch Third Space where it actually chronologically falls.
Sure, no,
in season
of course.
4.
Yep.
Which, it kind of breaks up the narration of season 4 in a way. Mm-hmm. I mean, it has some stuff that puts it in continuity, but it's kind of tonally a little different. So, but I kind of come down on, watch it right after, I think, Illusion of Truth, right before Atonement, I think.
Right.
Watch it there, then watch Atonement, then go watch In the Beginning. So you got kind of 2 movies of the week, bracketing one episode. It's a little weird, but that's how I recommend people go. But
yeah, I think Homer, we were on a conversation on Discord, and Homer and some other people, we were talking Babylon 5, and someone mentioned In the Beginning, and I said, Homer, please do not watch that until, I just said basically until the end of season 4, or if you want to recap the entire 4 seasons before you start season 5, because it was basically kind of like TNT's refresh, right, of everything that happened before this. And I said, and there's even more to it than that, because they go way into the Battle of the Line, way into Sheridan and Franklin's first meeting,
right?
And actually Sheridan, Franklin, and Jakar's first meeting, because they all met all at the same time. So there's a lot more to it. I'm like, yeah, you don't want to see it. I mean, of course, it's nice when you see things like, when Michael York comes in as the gunner, for the Prometheus and how he's plagued by that, and that's all well and good. But I just said, now there's just too much information there for you to see it at this time, because he's only finished season 1. Yeah,
the soonest you can watch it, I believe, is right after Atonement.
Yeah, I think so. Because that's where basically they pulled a lot of In the Beginning's flashbacks from with Ducat and Belen. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's where the secret gets out. She's the one who gave the extermination order and all that. So I feel like that's best where it goes. Plus, you get more of Reiner Schoen, who I think is just incredible in the role. It's like I could watch that guy just like walk around and talk about the weather or something. He's so fantastic.
I know, right?
In the role.
Yeah, Ducat's so good.
I know, just a boss.
This Ducat is so good. The other Ducat, not so good.
I get you. The one, my friend who's been going through the show, he's sort of in the latter part of season 4 right now. Mm-hmm. And his one criticism of In the Beginning, which I think I'll take, is that it has a little bit of small universe syndrome, right? That like you get sort of all these characters already met before, and they've already... of course it would be Dr. Franklin who would be with Sheridan, of course it would be Jakar who would be the Narn who was on Earth. Of course Londo would be the Centauri ambassador to Earth, and it's just a little too, I was like, dude, but I mean, Star Trek, like that, they got small universe syndrome like crazy in that show. It's a little too much.
Yeah, Star Wars too. Everything revolves around a Skywalker. So you can't get away from that, right? Or an Obi-Wan, or the Emperor, ever, always, But I mean, in the defense of In the Beginning, it's like In the Beginning wasn't really slated to be part of the 5-year arc. So it's just, it kind of shoehorned everything into like a Cliff Notes version of, if you've never seen seasons 1 through 4 before, watch this, and now you can jump into season 5 and pretty much be caught up. It's a Cliff Notes version of basically the Battle of the Line and the Earth Minbari War. So
yeah. Oh boy. Well, I think we are going to have a pretty good discussion today.
Yeah, man. Cool.
All right. So, any questions for me?
Nah, man. I'm just stoked to be doing this with you. All right.
Oh, me too, man. Me too. And I'm going to put it in the intro that I do in the wrapper really before this, that this is like really just a one-off thing. Like this is not going to be a normal thing for my show. I'm not starting a new podcast. I'm not going to be doing a bunch of these. This is like a one-time, one and done kind of deal.
Guilty pleasure. Guilty pleasure.
Yeah, this is really just a chance to nerdgasm a little bit, and that's it.
I feel you, man. I feel you. It's all good.
So did you know about the Yoo-hoo reference?
Yeah, you have to refresh my memory, but I remember something funny about that.
Whenever they needed a drink on the show, it was Yoo-hoo.
Yeah.
So like in the episode A Late Delivery from Avalon, when Jakar is getting drunk with Michael York. Right? And they're sitting around, right? They're drinking Yoo-hoo.
Right.
And then later on, when Franklin's on walkabout and he walks into the bar where the girl is singing, And the waitress walks up and she's like, and he's like, I'll have it. She just hands him a drink. He's like, I'll have this. That's strawberry Yoo-hoo.
Right.
So like Yoo-hoo was like their favorite drink
I remember
to use
that.
on set.
Yeah.
And so it was all Yoo-hoo. Yeah. And Zima, of course, was in the show.
Right.
So that
I talk about like literally, like seriously, like dating like a project. Just Zima. That's so 90s. It's as 90s as like the
as Crystal Pepsi.
Yeah, and the you know the sparingly, thank God, the sparingly use of neon signs and design work, you know, on the Zocalo, right?
Oh yeah, I really see it in sort of the casual wear on the station, right? When they put on some of those shirts Garibaldi wears and the sweaters that he wears every now and then, you know, when he's off duty, like that stuff is so 90s. Oh my God.
What is it about like science fiction lapel? Like the more science fiction it is, the thinner or lack of lapel becomes, right?
Yeah, exactly, right? Well, I think in their case, it was just a matter of they can go to JCPenney and buy off-the-rack suits, cut the lapels off, and there you go.
Put some buttons on it or flap it over, you know, turn it into a Psychor outfit, yeah.
Yeah, hey, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, oh, I would love to, man, but I'm usually tied up pretty badly on weekends. But have we ever talked about my saving construction of Gray 17 is Missing?
No.
Okay, so that's an episode that's sort of like the Spock's brain of Babylon 5, right? I mean, people sort of like to bag on it, right? Yeah. And here's how this was. I actually say it's a much more powerful episode than people give it credit for. Here's why. You have one of your main characters trapped in a place, and there's no physical escape. Mm-hmm. The only way to escape is to give yourself over to death and be consumed by the universe, right? That's Gray 17 is Missing.
Right.
Dude, that's also Zahadum.
Yeah.
Right? It is presaging 3 or 4 episodes in advance exactly what is going to happen to Sheridan in Zahadum. Except in this time, it's Garibaldi. He's trapped on Gray 17. Mm-hmm. The only way out is to surrender yourself to death to the Zarg. Right? That's exactly what happens to Sheridan, dude. The show is giving it away. But you don't see that unless on a rewatch you're paying close attention. Now, there's some execution issues, like the Zarg isn't so great, you know, and there's some other things. But the very idea of that episode is telling you something about what's going to happen, and they do this again and again in the show.
It's like you said with Kosh and with Brother Edward, that kind of similarity.
It's exactly. Yeah, they're giving you sort of what's going to happen later, but you don't recognize it until you go back and watch the show again.
It's like pre-planning, like foreshadowing, right?
Yeah, it is exactly a foreshadow, and most people never see it. And it's sort of like the reflection of the light bulb in the TV screen. Like once you see it, then you can't not see it. Right. Like it's the only thing you see. So every time I watch Gray 17, I'm like, "Oh, Gray 17 is missing," right? And I'm getting really good. People are like, "Dude, that's a terrible episode. Like, what are you doing?" And I'm like, "But," Right? Plus, it has that cool Naroon stuff, and I always like Naroon. So.
Yeah, Naroon's awesome.
One of my favorite season 1 moments in the show, like just something I just adore, is just that moment with him and Sinclair in his office at the end of Legacies.
Yep.
And they just sort of have this heartfelt little chat.
You speak like a Minbari.
I know. It's just, I could literally just watch that little scene. Just give me that scene and the mustard scene from, Intersections in Real. Like, I could just watch those two on a loop.
But it's just, after you've seen what we've seen and seen the entirety of the narrative, that's why Sinclair speaks like a Minbari. He's literally talking to Valen. Right.
I know. It's like, of course, it's like, it's hard to explain until people have seen the show, but it's like, well, you're talking about like the combination of like Jesus and George Washington, right? For the Minbari. Yeah. Like it's hard to kind of overstate the importance of the guy.
Exactly.
and that's him, and so that's why you can't watch in the beginning before the rest of the show, which by the way, it frustrates me because Joe has said that that's what people should do.
Well,
which is wrong. I'm sorry.
I mean, I don't agree with that, but I think that people should watch the show as it was broadcast. I mean, that's just
absolutely,
because there was a reason why they wrote it a specific way and especially you can't rearrange certain key things. I mean, you can't rearrange like the not the Coming of Shadows. Was it the Coming of Shadows? Yeah, the Coming of Shadows. You can't just say Morden will show up here and not here. Because it's like that, like when Morden comes on the scene, that changes like the dynamic of the show. It changes the gear.
Yeah.
You can't change where the gear changes, right? The whole thing with Lord Kiro and, and the premonition of the station. even though the premise of the station is completely different.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah, for sure. But, it's like we were talking about how these episodes are sort of mirrored, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you take a look at Midnight on the Firing Line. There's a sneak attack by one of the major governments on another sneak attack, and then the ambassador decides he's going to go kill the other ambassador. Right. That's the same story from, what is it, Coming of Shadows. It's the same story, right? It's just flipped. Right. And so all the characters have now rotated. And it goes back to what Jakar says in Midnight on the Firing Line. The wheel turns, does it not? Right. Except the problem is it continues to turn.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just they had a level of intricacy in what they were doing because it really came from the mind of that one guy that you just can't get, like in shows where you have a writer's room where you got 10 guys sitting around pitching stories and saying, what are we going to do?
I know.
And again, it's not a criticism. It's just that he was doing a very different kind of television.
Well, I think a writer's room works better for, shows that are more episodic as opposed to serialized, because you can just pitch an episodic show, maybe get some of the broader like narrative points in that carry over some details from show to show to show. But, like when you watch the original series or even Next Generation, most of it, it's just drop yourself into an episode, watch it, enjoy it, and then move on to the next one.